Welcome to Rewatch and Rank. On this channel, we rewatch older TV shows, provide a summary and opinion on the episode before ranking each episode against each other. Today's episode is Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami Arc, Episode 8, June 17th, Memories in the Rain. The episode in a nutshell is just a brief summary of exactly what happens within this episode. Ichigo and his family visit his mother's grave on the anniversary of her death, while Rukia is investigated by a Shinigami regarding the reason why she hasn't yet returned to Soul Society, and then Karen and Yuzu are attacked by a hollow at their mother's grave. Alright, so having rewatched the episode, we now will go into ranking this episode against all of the other episodes within the current arc. And we rank on two lists, a mostly objective list, which is absent emotion, and then the personal ranking, which is fully emotion and opinion based. As always, we start with our mostly objective rank values, and I've highlighted those I felt applied to this particular episode. So the first thing of note is that there was a successful emotional impact with regards to the mom's death. It is shown in flashbacks, and they show it from multiple kind of points of view. We have Tatsuki kind of talking to Inoue about how she saw Ichigo and his mother's relationship, and then the impact that it had on Ichigo once she had passed. We then, of course, get Ichigo's own flashbacks, and then, of course, him talking to Rukia, confessing that he thinks he's the one who killed his mother, and because we see it through many points of view, and interpretations, I feel like that is what allows it to have the impact when we haven't actually seen the character in order to get attached to the character, so that we feel the loss. Because they go so hard on showing it on multiple points of view, that increases it to the point where it actually does have a successful emotional impact with regards to the mom's death and her loss to Ichigo and also his family. And that's worth 3 points. We then have our multi-arc main character development. And I feel like there's 2 characters that are developed here. So that's 2 times 4, so that'll be a total of 8 points. The first one is that we find out that Rukia actually was adopted into the Kuchiki family. She wasn't actually born into her family, and this is told to us by the Shinigami who's coming to investigate her. As they went to school together, he was 2 years ahead of her at the Shinigami Academy, and she apparently was quite well known, and she was quite well known because she had recently been adopted into what is considered a noble Shinigami family. So that's a little bit of character development on Rukia, giving us a bit more about her backstory. And then we, of course, get Ichigo and his mother's death flashback and the effect that it had on Ichigo. We really see the effect that it had on Ichigo through Tatsuki's point of view, as she talks about how they had lessons together in martial arts, and at the time Ichigo was rather wimpy when he was 4 years old and first started, but how even if he was crying because he was beaten, as soon as he saw his mother, his face would brighten up and he'd smile and he'd run to her. He was very protective of his mother. We also then see how when they're 9, his mother dies, and Tatsuki talks about how Ichigo stopped going to school, and when she'd go at the end of the day walking home, she'd see him wandering the river like he was searching for his mother, which is where his mother had died, and how he'd, become less bright of a person with her loss, and also noting how she was the center of the family that everybody else in the family had revolved around when she was alive. The next bit of positive that we have is we have some additional world building where we learn that apparently being a substitute Shinigami is a shocking thing, so obviously not a regular occurrence, which I think we all could have figured out from like just the context clues so far in the previous episodes. But what we maybe didn't realize, because Rukia was so casual about it, is in fact it's apparently a crime, because as soon as Ichigo introduces himself as a substitute Shinigami, the Shinigami who's investigating Rukia's demeanor completely changes, and he comments on how she has committed a serious crime before he then attacks Ichigo. And so we learn that being a substitute Shinigami, not a normal occurrence, potentially criminal. And that is also worth 4 points, bringing us up to 15 out of 10. We do have one negative for this episode, which is very minor and doesn't impact the score at this point because we have such a high score. But at -1 point, I did feel that this episode was very much like we learned a lot throughout the episode. Like there was a lot of development of characters, world building, etc. We got a lot of content with it, but it was very much setting up again for the next episode. In that most of the information that we learned it because it is relevant to what is going to happen next, not necessarily to what is happening within this episode itself. But again, that's relatively minor. It was still a pretty good episode. And so overall, because the maximum score that can be achieved is 10 out of 10, and we were up to 14 out of 10, this episode will be, you guessed it, 10 out of 10. So as a reminder of our mostly objective arc rankings so far, in first place we have The Day I Became a Shinigami, The Shinigami's Work, The Older Brother's Wish, The Younger Sister's Wish, Fight to the Death, Ichigo vs. Ichigo. This episode falls into fifth place with June 17th, Memories in the Rain. Sixth was Greetings from a Stuffed Lion, then Beat the Invisible Enemy, and in last place is The Cursed Parakeet. As a reminder, the reason that this episode, despite being 10 out of 10, falls into fifth place is when episodes have the same score, we mark them on the mostly objective list in episode order, which is why we have had 4 other 10 out of 10 episodes. That puts this one at fifth. So now we come to my personal ranking. In this episode, I feel like there was a lot of good things, but like I said, the entire time I was kind of watching it, I was kind of like, you're telling me this because something better is going to happen later. So it wasn't bad, but it wasn't the best episode that's ever existed, in my personal opinion, which on the personal list, that's all that matters. So basically, in this episode, what happens is that they visit the mother's grave, and there's some comedic family antics on the way to the grave between basically Ichigo's father and his sisters. He's a little more tame in this episode, which we learn is because of the mother's death's impact on him. Rukia then appears, and Ichigo at first tries to pretend he doesn't know her, but she's waving pretty obviously. So then he runs over so that they can go talk privately, and Karen makes a comment to Yuzu about how she's going to need to say goodbye to their brother soon, or she's going to have to let go of her brother soon, implying that she thinks Rukia and Ichigo maybe are dating or have some sort of relationship, which personally I wouldn't mind. I think out of all of the options, though this isn't a romance by any means as far as the show, out of all the options, I feel like Ichigo and Rukia would make the best couple. I feel like the series kind of pushes Inoue in there, but I don't really see that myself. And of course, then Rukia and Ichigo, they go talk in the woods. We see kind of the Shinigami who is sent lurking around, watching them talk, and Ichigo wants to know why she followed him. She says it's in case of a hollow attack, she'll be close by so that if he does have to unleash his Shinigami powers, he'll be able to. And then while they're talking about how like his mom was killed, Rukia brings up basically his comment from the previous episode and speculates that because of how strong his powers were, he might have drawn a hollow to him as a child, and that may have been what killed his mom. But he gets very upset by this, sarcastically accuses her of trying to be funny before he says that he is the one who killed his mom. And basically, that is when they stop talking. We then see Rukia kind of sitting on a wall, kind of speculating. Sorry. No, it first goes back to Tatsuki and Inoue, and this is where they're talking about Ichigo. Inoue says that she's discovered Ichigo's secret, that he is secretly a superhero who is saving humanity. And we've kind of seen hints of that in previous episodes, that she has some awareness of the spiritual, maybe along like Yuzu's level, where like she can maybe sense the presence but maybe not see it, and after the issue with her brother. And we know from future, as we are rewatchers, that she does eventually be able to see kind of that Shinigami spiritual world. That's what she's referring to, but then that instead kind of launches Tatsuki into her recollection of Ichigo as a child in the fight school together, how much of a mama's boy he was, and that was when they were 4. Then at 9, the mom dying and him basically haunting the riverbank, trying to find her, blaming himself, and being a different person. We then move on to Rukia, who's reflecting on what she said and what Ichigo said, and kind of kicking herself for being insensitive towards Ichigo. This is, of course, when Khan appears out of the knapsack that she has and starts talking to her, and she shushes him as she senses another Shinigami. Because she jumps up so quickly, he falls out and into the woods, which is good because then he does go off and run into the forest trying to find Ichigo. We then get Ichigo's flashback of where he's walking in the rain with his mother. You know, he gets splashed by a car and offers, because he has a raincoat, to keep walking on that side so that his mother doesn't get splashed, but then she has him walk on the side away from the road because that's what a parent does. And it's just a cute little moment between them. And then it shows them walking by the river. Ichigo notices a girl by the river. He runs down the bank, like down the hill to the river bank, where he then tries to grab her before she falls into the river. Of course, his hand goes right through, and it's noted that at that time, because he was so young, he didn't have really the ability to tell the difference between what is a ghost and what is a real person. So he ran down to save her thinking she was a real girl. In reality, she was actually a ghost. It then has him basically blacking out, and then when he comes to, his mother's dead body is lying on top of him, and he says that he doesn't know exactly what had happened, but he is certain that she died while protecting him, hence why he blames himself for her death, because he's the one who ran after the ghost, and he is the one that she died protecting. So less of a he did it, more of a survivor's guilt scenario. And then, of course, we get to the present, and once again, this is why the impact was successful for the mom's death, is when we get back to the present, we then see Ichigo basically falling to his knees while crying in the privacy of the forest because of how much it impacted him, and this anniversary is bringing everything back. We then, of course, go to where the family is at the grave, and we see Yuzu once again also showing that impact as she's at the grave bawling, while Karen is trying to be the more stoic one. However, that moment is a little bit cut short and ruined by the fact that they once again have some family antics where the dad is trying to cheer them up and comes over all exuberantly, trying to be like lift their spirits, and Karen ends up basically just kicking him away by kicking him in the head. Then we get the flashback about Rukia being adopted while she to, she confronts the Shinigami. Kon then reaches Ichigo after falling down a cliff and lets him know about Rukia. Then we get the rest of the conversation with Rukia and the Shinigami, where she's questioned about why she hasn't returned. Her initial excuse is that hollows keep appearing and she keeps getting orders through her phone, so she hasn't felt a need to go back, and that she doesn't have any intention of going back anytime soon. The Shinigami here also implies some feelings for Ichigo because he had witnessed their earlier conversation, which is denied. And then, of course, Ichigo arrives to defend Ichigo, or not defend Ichigo. Ichigo arrives to defend Rukia, but he tells the truth, not knowing, because she's been so casual about it like it's a normal thing, that being a substitute Shinigami is a weird and not normal thing. And basically, at this point, the Shinigami who's questioning Rukia basically is like, oh, you've committed a serious crime. And then he proceeds to try to attack Ichigo. Ichigo digs the pill out of the stuffed lion, takes it so that he can become a Shinigami, and he and the Shinigami go back and forth. Ichigo is clearly less skilled in the fight at this point, but that makes sense because the Shinigami would have been training, has gone through an academy for sword fighting, and Ichigo's just kind of swinging wildly and usually against unskilled hollows. While they're having their little back and forth, a hollow does attack the grave where Yuzu and Karen are. This, of course, is sensed and heard by Rukia and Ichigo, who then run towards the mother's grave and his family to try to protect them, while the other Shinigami kind of trails behind. And they talk about how she's going to wait until he's ready to tell her about his mom and isn't going to push him for an answer, which is very emotionally sensitive of her this time because she's already screwed that up. But obviously her reflecting worked. And then before they arrive, our cliffhanger for the end of the episode is that during this attack, the hollow has stated that it needs bait, but it only needs one bait, so it's basically got Karen on the ground pinned, and then it's picking up Yuzu and intending to eat her. And we end the episode on her about to be eaten and Karen on the ground. It is a compelling cliffhanger, makes you want to get to the next episode so we can find out what happens. I mean, because it is geared more towards a younger audience, we know that Yuzu's not actually going to die, but if this was your first time watching it, that would have been a tense cliffhanger, and then you have to wait an entire week to know what would have happened to her. And like I said, it's not a bad episode. We're learning a lot, we're having a lot of interaction, we're getting a lot of backstories, but it is really setting up for the next episode and the next arc and what's happening in the future. Like everything that we are being told in this episode really feels like we are being told it because it's important later or it's impactful later. There was some comedy, like some comedic moments. There were some fun back and forth. There was the emotional, the flashbacks, the knowledge, blah, blah, blah. I've already said all this. Anyways, the point is, I felt like it was a good episode, but also it wasn't the best episode. It was entertaining, but it also felt like you were waiting for more or you were getting ready to anticipate more rather than actually enjoying the moment and what was on screen, for me at least. So personally, I gave this episode a 6 out of 10 ranking because there have been better ones. There are going to be better ones, but it was just a good episode overall. So 6 I felt was fair. And therefore, as a reminder of our ARC rankings so far on the personal ranking, in first place for me we have the older brother's wish, the younger sister's wish, beat the invisible enemy, the Shinigami's work, curse parakeet, and boy was that the cutest sounding parakeet that's ever existed. That's kind of why this one didn't beat it, to be honest. And then in fifth place, with the same score as Curse Parakeet, we have June 17th, Memories in the Rain. And then in sixth, The Day I Became a Shinigami. Seventh was Greetings from a Stuffed Lion, and then in 8th place was Fight to the Death, Ichigo versus Ichigo, which is the least favorite so far. And finally, with all of that being said, we are now in the segment where we rank each arc against each other in the series overall ranking. We add 10 points on the mostly objective side, which brings the total score so far to 7 out of 200. And then on the personal side, we've added 6 for a total of 47 out of 200 in the arc so far. So with that, we have now rewatched and ranked Bleach, Agent of the Shinigami Arc, Episode 8, June 17th, Memories in the Rain. Like and subscribe if you'd like to, and I'll see you in the next episode.